In a lot of ways, the 1920s was a decade of conflict. How did race play into this, though? Well, stick around because that's what we're going to talk about today in Mr. E's classroom. Hey ladies and gentlemen, Mr. E here. Today we're going to talk about racial issues in the 1920s. Specifically, we're going to try our best to answer the question, what was the result of racial tensions in the 1920s? So grab your pencil and paper, get ready to take some notes, pay attention to the video, and by the time it's over, hopefully you'll have an answer to that question. The first big issue we need to talk about is the revival of the KKK. That's right, the Klan's back. But this isn't the old Klan of Reconstruction era South. This is a new kind of Klan. This is a Klan that really fought against change. Remember that issue we had with modernists versus traditionalists? This new Klan really doesn't like this modernist attitude. They don't like the fact that America is changing so much. They really fight against this change. They also typically target anyone that they consider to be un-American. Anybody that has any kind of un-American values, anybody that's not 100% devoted to what they called Americanism. They also go after people that are Jewish, Catholic, immigrants. It's not just blacks anymore. Remember, this is the new Klan. And they are found all over the United States, not just in the South. Turns out this new Klan was the strongest in the Midwest. For some reason, Indiana was kind of ground zero for this new Klan. They were roughly about 4 to 5 million strong. This is vastly larger than anything we saw during the Reconstruction era. During the 1920s, we also saw a rise in race riots. African Americans and whites were competing for a lot of these new industrial jobs that were showing up. A lot of northern cities were experiencing a massive inflow of African Americans thanks to the Great Migration. And this really just kind of rubbed a lot of whites the wrong way. Next thing you know, there's a lot of violence and death and a lot of property damage. Probably the biggest of all the race riots was the Chicago race riot in 1919. Happened in the summertime, lasted about 13 days. When all was said and done, 38 people were dead, 500 were injured, and countless millions of dollars of property destruction. Another pretty significant race riot happened in Tulsa in 1921. It's known as the Tulsa Massacre. This happened in an area called Greenwood. Greenwood was a suburb of Tulsa that was populated by fairly affluent blacks. This was a pretty well-to-do area of the city. It was known as the Black Wall Street. It was also a much wealthier community than some of the neighboring white communities. In 1921, a black man was accused of raping a white woman in Tulsa. This had nothing to do with Greenwood, but the white residents in and around the Greenwood area kind of got bent out of shape and went just a little bit nuts. To kind of illustrate that point, here's a before and an after of Greenwood. Before, it was a pretty nice place. After this massacre, not so much. Like I had mentioned before, racial tension had kind of come to a boiling point, and whites were not very happy that there were a group of African Americans that were doing better than them. The results of this massacre are pretty significant. Out of the roughly 10,000 residents of the Greenwood community, about 6,000 of them wind up being detained or arrested during this period. Roughly 9,000 are left homeless, and roughly about 300 blacks in the community are dead. Although counts really do vary, some say it could be much higher. The community was totally destroyed, and a lot of that was a result of the tension that had kind of boiled up between races. In this video, I actually only have 2 takeaways for you. Number 1, in the 1920s, the KKK is back, and they really don't like change. Number 2, remember that competition for industrial jobs really was a cause of a lot of major racial problems in the 1920s. And that kind of wraps it up. Hopefully you got some great notes. Hopefully you're going to be ready for that quiz when it happens in class. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, remember, don't ever stop learning. Greenwood was a suburb of Tulsa. Greenwood was a suburb of Tulsa.